Thanks for tuning in to the Big Money Investor Show with Jim Ingersoll, where we talk about the best strategies for you to create cash flow and long-term wealth. Investing like the very top investors. Visit us online at www.bigmoneyinvestor.com and enjoy today's show.
Our special guest today is David Krulac, and David literally started with nothing when he first started out in real estate, and he financed his first 11 properties. Today, he's a full-time real estate investor, a fellow speaker, fellow author, a broker in central Pennsylvania. He's bought and sold over 900 properties for his own personal portfolio. He started out as a part-time investor, which is a great way to start, and he had a busy full-time career. He had a lot of travel. But he was able to accelerate his real estate holdings by purchasing in 1 year 39 properties and then selling off 35 of them while having a full-time non-real estate job. So he bought and sold 35 houses his first year while working full-time. For 20 straight years, he has been averaging buying or selling about one house per month. He specializes in locating, researching, purchasing, improving, and selling niche properties that many other investors just simply overlook. His experience includes title searching, tax assessment appeals, zoning issues, soil perk testing, and really unusual real estate situations that he's become great at solving complex problems. David Krulac's book presents highlights of his real estate career with overviews and lessons learned from some of his good deals, great deals, and as well as some of his not-so-great deals. David is very realistic and has a practical approach to buying, holding, flipping, and renting real estate. He's also done subdivision and land development, having used over 20 different acquisition methods to find and purchase properties. David has extensive experience in government, tax sale, foreclosure, sheriff sales, auctions, MLS, private party sales, for sale by owner, estate probate, sealed bid, veteran affairs, foreclosures, HUD foreclosures, loves using the HUD home store, pre-foreclosures, public sale, letter solicitation, life estate property, and relocation companies. He's also bought in many different classes of real estate assets, including single-family homes, duplexes, townhouses, condos, apartment buildings, scattered vacant lots that are landlocked that he solves, farms, woodland, waterfront, mixed use, commercial, landlocked, failed septic test, floodplain, and out-of-state property. His book is very informative to both a novice and an experienced real estate investor. Personally, I've had the pleasure of knowing David for several years. I've shared some really great speaking opportunities with him, speaking on the exact same stage. I have had his book for a long time, and I do highly recommend that everybody go to Amazon today, look up David Krulac, and grab this book. It's called How I Started with Nothing and Made $12 million in Real Estate Starting Part-Time. So, David, welcome to the Investor Success Podcast. I am really excited to hang out with you and talk about real estate today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jim. It's always a pleasure talking to you and meeting with you.
I love it. Well, let's go back to the beginning. And when you were working full-time and you were doing a lot of travel and a lot of different things, you jumped into real estate. How did you make that transition work when you were first getting started?
I worked on the weekends with real estate. You know, I worked a daylight Monday through Friday job, so I had weekends available. A friend of mine had gotten into real estate and was having success with it, and I saw what he was doing, and I thought it was something that I would like to also get into. My initial plan was that I was going to buy some real estate as kind of a supplement for a far in the future retirement. But it graduated to much more than that, and I bought many more properties than I initially thought that I was going to be buying. I thought I'd buy a couple properties and, it would end there, but it didn't.
It sort of becomes addictive, doesn't it?
It does. It's kind of hard to stop.
It is.
I'm still buying property.
Right. It's an addictive thing because it's a lot of fun. You're transforming properties and solving problems, and you get to have fun doing it, and you make money along the way. I mean, it's really the best of all the different worlds. So tell me about that first house that you bought and how that went, because, you know, a lot of people are trying to figure out, you know, how they can get started. I love your story because, like yourself, I started off doing it part-time and started doing a lot of deals part-time. And as soon as I was making almost as much part-time as I was full-time, then I knew it was time for me to transition into real estate full-time. But take me back to some of those early deals you did and how you found them and what you ended up doing with them and how they worked out.
Since my friend had success with real estate, I decided I wanted to get into it too. So I started looking, you know, at real estate. But I had a low-paying job and I didn't have any savings, so that presented a couple obstacles there. But I looked at a bunch of properties. I looked at stuff that was listed for sale in the multi-list. I looked at stuff that was, you know, for sale by owners. I looked at all different kinds of properties. I looked at some single-family houses. I looked at some mobile homes. I looked at small apartment buildings. I looked at some houses on rented land that weren't mobile homes, that were, you know, permanent structures. But I couldn't find anything that exactly fit. You know, the things that I could afford, I didn't like, and the things that I liked, I couldn't afford. So this was going on for a number of months, and I would tell everybody that I knew that I'm looking to buy some real estate. Somebody that I worked with said to me, well, there's going to be an auction on my street. They're selling a house. And so he told me the particulars, and I went and I looked at it. And it was owned by the State Highway Department. And they had purchased it to put in an interchange on a 4-lane highway. And the design of the interchange was going to empty the interchange into the middle of this subdivision, and the people who lived in the subdivision protested, and they got the highway department to redesign the interchange so that it skirted the development rather than going into the development. Well, they had already purchased some properties, and they rented them for 7 years. And then it took an act of the legislature and the signature of the governor before they could sell these properties. It was considered excess properties to the state. So they had an auction, and I went to the auction, and it wasn't very well advertised. There was a sign on the front of the property, but the street was a street that ended in a cul-de-sac, so it didn't have any through traffic on that street. And they had put an ad in the newspaper, but it had the legal description, the meets and bounds, and it said having thereupon a dwelling, but it didn't describe the house at all, and it didn't have any pictures of the house. So it wasn't well advertised. I went to the auction. I had borrowed money from my parents for the down payment. They required, as terms of the auction, the 10% down in cash the day of the sale. I went to the auction, and I recognized that there was a broker who was there who was bidding, and it ended up that it was him and I at the end bidding against each other. And I was sure that he wasn't buying it to live in. No, I was looking at it to purchase it and live in it, but I was sure that he wasn't going to be doing that. He was either going to be using it as a rental or he was going to flip it. So I felt that I had a little bit of advantage, that I could pay a little bit more. I ended up going over what my bid limit was, and I finally got the property, and I didn't have enough money for the deposit, so I had to borrow some more money from a friend of mine who came to the auction just to watch. He didn't realize that it was going to cost him money to come and watch the auction.
He was participating.
Yeah, he didn't know that he was participating when he went to the auction. He just came to the auction out of curiosity. But I literally had no money. I couldn't go to the bank and get money out of my account because I didn't have any money in my account.
Right.
And I had just started this job. I'd only been on the job like less than 9 months. And so he gave me lent me the money to make up the deposit, and I was able to satisfy the 10% deposit. And I lived in an apartment, and I gave notice to move out of my apartment, and they quickly re-rented my apartment. And I naively thought that we were going to settle in 30 days because that's what the contract said. I had never bought any real estate before. I'd never entered a contract like that before. I'd never been to an auction before. Well, 30 days comes and passes, and we still haven't settled. So I went to the Attorney General's office. They're the people that were handling the sale at the state. I went to the state capitol and talked to the Deputy Attorney General who was in charge of this sale. And I said, I'm going to be homeless. They've already re-rented my apartment. I thought we were going to settle in 30 days. I said, is it possible that I could move into the house before settlement? The house was vacant. And he said, oh, no, we can't do that. We don't have any insurance on it. I guess it was a state policy that they would self-insure, that they didn't carry an insurance policy. And I said, well, that's no problem. I said, I already got an insurance policy because I thought we were settling in 30 days, so I have an insurance policy already. He said if I show proof of insurance that they would give me the keys and let me move in. So I got the insurance binder from the insurance company and took it over to the state, and they gave me the keys.
Wow.
Well, in this whole discussion, there was no talk about rent. No, I didn't bring it up. They didn't bring it up. I thought we were going to
it's a highway department, so they don't care, right?
I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, I was a novice and I was naive, and I thought we were going to settle in a few days, and rent was going to be immaterial. And I'm not sure what their motivation was for not bringing it up, but I didn't bring it up, so they didn't bring it up. I got the keys. I moved in. I got a roommate to move in and pay me rent.
Wow.
And I lived there for 6 more months before we settled.
Holy cow.
The state took care of the sewer and the trash under the municipal ordinance. That had to go to the record owner, and the state was the record owner. They also had contracted for lawn service, so every week somebody would come and cut the grass. And so I lived there. I paid the heat and the electric and the water. I got some rent in from a roommate, and I didn't pay any rent or any mortgage for 6 months. It was a great deal. I said to myself, no, this real estate, this is good stuff. I'm going to buy some more of this stuff.
You're going to look for more highway department deals, right? So you lived there for 6 months without paying rent, but you collected rent from your roommate, and all your utilities were basically covered by the state.
Most of the utilities I paid. I paid heat and I paid electric and water, but they paid sewer and trash and they paid lawn service. So it was like 50-50, I'd say.
So then 6 months later, finally they said, all right, now we can go ahead and close on the property.
Yeah, and we did, and I got a mortgage, and we settled on the property. And I lived there for a few years, and the second property I bought a 3-unit apartment building.
A triplex, okay.
I got that from word of mouth also. Essentially the first deal was, the coworker of mine who tipped me off to the sale, which I might have overlooked. The second one came from my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and somebody at her work, their grandmother had passed away and lived in this apartment that the grandmother owned, and she rented out 2 of the apartments. And it wasn't listed for sale, and my wife found out about it through her coworker, and I went and looked at it and made an offer on the property, and I ended up buying that.
Did you buy it direct from the Who was the seller in that case?
It was the estate. There were
Okay.
6 heirs of the grandmother.
So went through probate?
Went through probate. There were 6 heirs. The 6 heirs were all adult children of the grandmother.
Okay.
And they didn't have it listed for sale, and
Right.
it was an older property and it needed updating.
Of course.
Whereas the first property that I bought was only like 15 or 16 years old when I bought it, and it really didn't need any updating. No, it just needed cleaned and painted. This needed a lot of updating. I ended up having all new electric put in and almost all new plumbing and new heating, and did a whole bunch of work on the property. And then I kept that property as a rental, and I just recently sold it. I had owned it all these years.
Holy cow.
I sold it.
Go ahead.
I sold it a couple months ago for 6 times what I paid for it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And all the years I was collecting rent from it, and it always had positive cash flow, and I had done a bunch of updates to the property and improved the property over the years. And we put in new windows and roof and siding and all kinds of things. So it was a much better property when I sold it than it was when I bought it.
So early on, you got the one property you bought at an auction from a highway department, and then you bought the triplex, and you became a landlord, and you owned it for all these years. You recently sold it for 6 times what you bought it for. This real estate stuff really does work, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that, buy and hold has been a big component of what I do.
Yeah.
And as long as you have positive cash flow, there's not a big reason to sell. Like this property that I sold, this 3 units that I sold, it really wasn't for sale. Somebody had asked me if I had any apartments for sale, and I said I didn't, but I had this apartment, and they came and looked at it, and we worked out a deal. It wasn't even listed for sale or anything. I didn't have a sign on it or anything. So I wasn't like really actively looking to sell it, but I decided I owned it a long time. I had done a bunch of improvements to it, and there wasn't much else that I could do to the property to improve it.
And both of these came from referrals, and I think that's a huge investor success tip for everybody today. Like David, I get the majority of my deals from referrals as well. Has that been sort of a staple in your strategy for all these years up till today?
It's been one of the strategies that I use. I call it word of mouth. I've bought other properties. When I was working full-time, somebody that I worked with was being transferred across country, and they had 2 houses. They had the house they lived in, plus they had a rental house. I ended up buying both of those. One of the things that I often do when I buy a property is I introduce myself to the neighbors, and I'll say something like, well, you have a nice house here. If you ever think about selling, give me a call. And I'll give them my name and number, and I have business cards. And I've gotten, callbacks on that, years later sometimes, and I've bought adjoining properties that way that weren't listed, and essentially no one else knew that they were for sale. It was like buying in secret.
Yeah. I love buying that way, and I think it's important that we all tell people what we do. It's a simple strategy for finding houses, just like you just described.
And I think business cards are an important component of that.
I do too.
Your business cards should have all of your contact information on it. Your phone number and your email address and your website and your fax number if you have a fax, all that information on it. And on my business cards, I have a couple different business cards. I have one for my brokerage company. I have one for my book. I use both sides of the business card. There's always something on the back of my business card. On my brokerage business card. The back of my card has a little synopsis of my experience, what I do, what I'm looking for. It's kind of like a resume almost on the back of my business card. Most of the people I see have business cards, the back is blank. To me, that's a waste. You're going to pay for the card, you might as well put it on both sides.
I completely agree. We both know Quincy Long, and Quincy likes to say it loud and say it proud. Tell people what you do. It's a very simple strategy that is highly effective. And I love the way that when you buy a house, you go to the neighbors. The neighbors get so excited when they see these houses getting, refurbished and fixed back up. It helps their values, helps the whole neighborhood. And they're happy to meet the people working on the house anyways. So why not tell them that you're looking for more houses to buy? Very, very effective.
And I've used that effectively. There was one street that had 20 houses on it. I ended up buying 4 houses on that street. And there was only 20 houses on that street. And I ended up renting all 4 of the properties that I bought there. I was the only one that had rental properties, rental houses on that street. All the other houses were owner-occupied, which is another thing that I like to look for. I like to look in neighborhoods that are owner-occupied.
Good tips. Can you share a couple of the deals out of your book? Your book, How I Started With Nothing and Made $12 million in Real Estate Part-Time, is awesome because it's packed full of case studies. And if I remember right, it's 200 or 250 different houses you bought, how you bought them, how you found them, what you did with them.
There's about 270 properties. Some of them aren't houses. There's some that are apartments. There's some that are land. Some are scattered lots. So there's a lot of different things in the book.
Tell us about a couple of them that you like. Maybe tell us about the cabin, or if you've got another one, that's fine.
I've bought several cabins. There's one that's not in the book that I purchased after the book was written. This was a cabin in a small development that only had about 20 houses, and it had a lake. And the lake and the road and all the houses were all developed by one builder. And they were log cabins. And the owner had purchased it 3 years before for $180,000 cash. So it was fairly nice. It was on a couple acres, and the back of it adjoined state forest land of thousands of acres. So you could walk from your backyard onto thousands of acres of state land that was all wooded. Well, the owner didn't pay the taxes on it, and it went to tax sale. And this was the tax sale where all of the liens transfer with the purchase. So you have to be cautious about mortgages that are against the property or judgments or liens or anything else like that. So I did a full title search on it, and I couldn't find any liens. There wasn't any mortgage. There wasn't any liens or judgments or anything else. The people had bought it for cash and never had a mortgage on it. They only bought it 3 years earlier. So it seemed kind of strange. It was kind of unusual that somebody would let it go to taxes. And I'm not sure what the situation was. The owner lived out of state, and apparently the owner didn't want to be found. There must have been something else going on in their life. I'm not sure what it was. So they ended up letting it go at tax sale, didn't pay the taxes on it, and I ended up buying it for $6,500. And they had paid $180,000 for it 3 years earlier.
And you got it for how much, David?
$6,500.
So they paid $180,000. You paid $6,500.
That's correct.
I think that story turns out good in the end, doesn't it?
Well,
That's an opportunity.
It turned out even better than I initially imagined. We did a little bit of cleanup in it and a little bit of painting, and that was all we did. It really didn't need a bunch of work on it. And we never listed it or advertised it for sale. While we were there doing some work on it, a friend of one of the neighbors came over and said that they were from the D.C. area, and there were several other people from the D.C. area that owned houses in this little development. And he was friends with one of the people that already had a house there, and he came and stayed at their house many times, and he liked the area, and he said to us, well, what are you going to be doing with this house after you fix it up? And I said, well, we're going to be selling it. And he said, well, I'd be interested in buying. I really like this area. I've been coming up here with my friends for a couple years, and I'd be interested in buying it. And so we ended up selling it to him for $140,000.
Wow.
So he got a bargain price. He got it $40,000 less than the last owner paid for it, and we made well over six figures.
Right.
And
this
we didn't
real estate
advertise
stuff really works, doesn't it?
We didn't advertise it. It wasn't listed for sale in the multi-list. It wasn't even on Craigslist. We didn't even have a sign on the property.
Right.
We did nothing to get the sale except talk to some guy who walked over and started talking to us.
Oh, you got to be willing to talk to people. That's for sure. That's a great story. So you bought that at tax sale?
Bought that at tax sale.
How did tax sales in Pennsylvania work? What is the process for that?
There's two different. Well, first of all, Pennsylvania is a tax deed state. About half the states in the United States are tax deed states. When you go to the sale and you're the high bidder, you get the deed to the property. About 50% of the states have tax liens, and so when you're the successful bidder at their auctions, you don't get the deed to the property. You're buying the lien on the property, so you're sort of like a mortgage holder against the property.
Yep.
And in Pennsylvania, there's different sales. One of the sales wipes out all of the mortgages and liens, and one of the sales doesn't wipe out all the mortgages and liens. And it happened that the one where we bought this cabin on the lake was one where the liens weren't wiped out. So typically those sales have less attendance and less competition because people don't want to buy some property and have a big mortgage on it.
It has more risk.
Inherited. There's more risk. You need to do a title search before you buy the property, and so that kind of inhibits the competition. This cabin was kind of a fluky thing. That doesn't happen every day, and most of the properties that are at that sale have mortgages and liens against them. I know oftentimes the mortgages and liens exceed the value of the property. So you go to the sale. It's a verbal auction. They have an auctioneer, and you have to pay right then. You have to pay 100% cash. Whatever your bid is, you have to pay, plus all the expenses and taxes and all that. You have to pay like right away. So you don't have an opportunity to go to the bank and get a mortgage and get it appraised.
You brought your $6,500 and you walked away with a cabin.
Right, and we didn't see the inside. It was locked before the sale, and so we were buying it sight unseen. On the inside, we had looked at the outside, looked at the windows, done a title search, and did some other things, but we didn't see the inside till after the sale. So that's a risk there. There's been times where we've been surprised by the inside. So,
is this one of the cases where you were surprised? I mean, it wasn't beat up that bad or anything, right?
It wasn't beat up at all. It was in good condition.
Yeah. Nice surprise.
In general, I like to think that the inside's going to look like the outside. If the outside's neglected and not paint's peeling on the outside, it's probably going to be similar on the inside. But there's cases that are that doesn't follow the rule. There's cases where the outside looks decent and the inside something is totally
in the
different.
wall or something. Yeah.
Or leaks in the roof. I bought a house that had a real low-pitched roof on it, and in the back of the house with a exposed basement, the roof was 3 stories up because it was a 2-story house with a basement. I couldn't see the roof. Well, I bought the house, and it had a bad roof leak, and it caused a lot of damage on the inside, which I wasn't aware of until after I owned the property.
Well, that's a great way to buy a tax sale. You just got to understand what the risk is, and you got to understand the title and the fact that you're not going to get inside. Do you have one more from your book in particular that you'd like to share? One more real estate story? It's a great way for people to learn. That's why I love your book. I mean, it's a great book. Everyone should go to Amazon and get it because it's all case studies. It's real life deals. Maybe one more out of your book you could share with everybody today?
Sure. I bought a house at tax sale that was only 12 years old, and it was in good condition. I went and looked at it. It was vacant. It was on a cul-de-sac. It has 4 bedrooms and 3 full baths and a 2-car garage.
Sounds like a nice house.
It's a nice house. It had been through sheriff's sale previously and was owned by a bank. But the bank didn't pay the taxes on it, and I think that was due to the fact that the bank was from out of state, and in a lot of states on these tax sales they have the right of redemption, which means that after the tax sale, if you're the owner, you can come back and pay the taxes for a certain period of time. Some of the states, like in West Virginia, the redemption period is 2 years. So even after the tax sale happens, the owner can come back for up to 2 years and pay the taxes and penalties and everything and get the property back. But in Pennsylvania, there is no right of redemption. No, once the sale happens, it's done. No, you get the deed, you're the owner. This bank didn't pay the taxes, which was like a ridiculous thing for them to do. But I'm assuming that they thought that there was a right of redemption. They were from a state where there is right of redemption, but Pennsylvania doesn't have right of redemption. So their legal counsel gave them bad advice, I'm assuming. So this property, there were a couple other people bidding on it at the sale, but it was kind of convoluted because there was this sheriff's sale and it was owned by a bank, and I think some of the other bidders might have been concerned that the mortgage wasn't wiped out, but the sheriff's sale wipes out mortgages, so it really didn't have any mortgages against it. But there was a flaw in the sheriff's sale. The people had 3 mortgages on the property, and only 2 of the mortgages were served, so only 2 of the mortgages were actually wiped out by the sheriff's sale, and there was this 3rd mortgage that was hanging out there. But through my research, I was able to find out that the 3rd mortgage wasn't in default. Even though the owners had lost the property in foreclosure, they still were paying on this 3rd mortgage because it had been arranged through a personal family friend, and they didn't want to hurt their friend who had referred them to this 3rd mortgage. So they, even after they lost the house, were still current on this 3rd mortgage, and they kept it up to date, and they paid it until they paid it off, which is, again, an unusual situation. So I went to the tax sale. A couple people else bid on it. I ended up buying the property for $30,000.
Wow.
It's worth $360,000.
Wow.
And I got it in free and clear. It doesn't have any mortgage on it. And
Well, it's a quick way to add to your net worth, isn't it? And
I rented it. I kept the property and rented it out. It's in good condition, a newer type property. The first tenant that I rented it to paid $2,050 a month in rent, plus utilities. So I bought a $30,000 house where the first tenant paid $2,050 a month in rent.
And you picked up all that equity.
And I picked up all that equity.
That's a good deal. Lots of great stories.
There's a lot more details about that in the book.
Yeah, and people need to grab that book. Where do you see 2016 heading, and where do you think some of the deals you'll pick up this year are going to come from, and so on? We're into almost to the end of the first quarter of 2016. What's this year looking like in your mind?
I think that there's still a lot of foreclosures out there. There is competition. But as you know, I buy a lot of properties through HUD, and I just got a HUD property that I got for 44% of their asking price.
Wow.
It's one of the lowest, if not the lowest, that I've ever gotten on a percentage basis.
I can't believe that you did that. Congratulations. I haven't been able to get to 50%. I mean, that's really good.
It's difficult getting to 50%. More typical are stuff that I'm buying 70%, something like that.
Right.
This one was on the market for a long time, and the longer that it's on the market, the more flexible they are in accepting lower prices. I got another one just recently that they appraise these before they put them on the market. The appraisal on this one was $89,900. I just got it for $16,000.
Holy mackerel!
But it had been on the market
deals.
It had been on the market for over 200 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
In our market, the HUD home store deals are drying up. I mean, there aren't very many of them that go to available for investor. I mean, they're the inventory is way down in locally where I'm at in Richmond, and so that source is sort of drying up a bit for me. But I know in other parts of the country, the HUD foreclosures are still really a great way to go.
One of the things that an investor can do, particularly if you're new in the business, like I was when I was new in the business, was buying a property and moving into it. And that makes HUD properties still available to you because for the first 10 days, they're only owner-occupant bids. If you're willing to move into the property, bid as an owner-occupant, they only require that you live there for 1 year. So after the 1 year is over, you can move out and you can buy another HUD property and move into that. One of the properties I bought, it wasn't a HUD foreclosure, but I ended up getting an FHA mortgage, which is only for owner-occupants. And I ended up moving into that house in order to get the mortgage because I thought it was such a great property.
Right.
So if you're willing to move,
good idea.
HUD is still an opportunity for owner-occupants.
And if you're like a fireman, policeman, first responder, they've also got that special program for you as well, don't they?
Yeah, that's an excellent program. You can be a teacher, a fireman, a policeman, or an EMT, and they call it the Good Neighbor Next Door program. You can buy a property for 50% of what their asking price is. You have to live there for 3 years as your primary residence. So you have to stay there for
great tip.
For 3 years, but it's a great opportunity to buy a property at 50% of what their asking price is. They're non-negotiable in that. If you offered them 49%, they wouldn't accept it. No, they're non-negotiable. It's 50%. Period. That's it.
Well, it's pretty nice to get half off of a foreclosure, and then living there for 3 years. It's nice because if you trade up to another house, you don't have to pay tax on all that capital gain either.
That's
so
right.
It's a nice way to take advantage of the IRS as well. So it's good.
And another way, which I used, after I bought my first house and I moved out of it, I rented it, so I didn't have to pay capital gains on that either because I didn't sell it.
Right.
So you can keep buying properties after properties. I talk about it in the book. A friend of mine bought like 7 properties, all of them owner-occupant, all of them legal. He would buy a property, he would live in it for a year, and then he'd look for another property, and he'd buy that property and live in that for a year, and then buy another property and live for that for a year. If you do that's serial owner occupancy. You're getting the lowest interest rates, the best terms on the mortgage, the lowest down payments. Some of those properties he bought FHA, some of them he bought conventional. He never put more than 5% down. And he bought 7 properties. And several of the properties he bought were multi-units. He bought a 3-unit, he bought a 4-unit, which you can buy FHA and even conventional owner-occupant as long as you live in one of the units.
Right.
So that's a great opportunity that you can get the best financing there is, the lowest down payments, the lowest interest rates, and all you have to do is be willing to move every year or so.
All right. That is awesome. If somebody wants to get your book, is it best to go to Amazon or go to your website to pick it up?
If you go to my website, which is $12millionbook.com, and 12 is the numerals 1, 2. I have free shipping on my website, so you can get it for free, and we ship them priority mail, so most people would get it in 2 days.
So it's $12millionbook.com, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's 1, 2, and then the word million, the word dollar, and the word book.com. Everybody needs to grab a copy of that because you're going to learn so many phenomenal ways to solve problems for people, and you're going to start seeing opportunity all around you that you're not seeing right now. David, you're a great friend, and I really appreciate your sharing so openly so much great content today. That's it for this special episode of the Investor Success Podcast. Thank you so much, David Krulac, for being my guest today. My name is Jim Ingersoll. I'm your host for this podcast. I'm also the founder of Investor Success Mastermind, where I help investors find their success in real estate. You can pick up a free gift I've got for you today. It's an investor starter kit at bigmoneyinvestor.com. You're welcome to email me, jim@investingnownetwork.com. Thank you so much, David, for everything. I look forward to connecting with you again in the future, in the near future. But all my best to you, and thanks for sharing.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and social media contacts, and visit us online at www.bigmoneyinvestor.com.